Well, let's move forward now to the National Memorial,
Mm-hmm.
because you were the one who really advocated putting Mike's name and the JCL Creed inscribed on the memorial. Can you talk about why that was important?
Yeah, I'm afraid, as I told you on the phone, that to put it mildly, I am not an uncontroversial person. Uh, I was called by a couple of vets, one of whom lives around here, as 442 member, said, "Look, they got Mike off the wall." And I said, "What? This whole idea of a memorial was Mike's idea." Because this is the way he was. He'd think of things like he would think of Densho, right? So he said, "We ought to have a memorial." And people said, no, they don't do memorials for ethnic groups because everybody, the Lithuanians would want one, and Washington would be, but we got it. We got the authorization to do this memorial. It's Mike's idea. How can they keep him off the wall? Beyond that, Mike, as I said to you earlier, is, this, as far as I'm concerned, the single most gifted leader that our community is yet to produce. I will say beyond anybody who now sits in Congress, or indeed beyond those of his brother-in-law who now sits in Bush's cabinet. So I went down there, and the board consisted of about 30 people. And we had a little conversation, the vets and I had a little conversation, and I said, "Oh yeah, I'll carry this banner." So I went into the executive board meeting, and there may have been 10, and to be followed later that afternoon by the full board. And the issue was, in some sense, classically American, and in another sense, very Japanese. There were a group of people who were well-meaning, who felt that Mike had done a great disservice to our community in 1941, 42, 43. And it's not clear how much strength they had, but they were absolutely immovable. So in the Japanese tradition, you go into the kitchen and you try to work this out. Well, if you're on the other side and you understand how the Japanese mores work, you say, well, we got this thing won because we're not going to move. All right? And the Niseis, who are still sort of Meiji, even Tokugawa, say, "Oh my God, we've got to form some sort of consensus because it's just can't be done any other way." So this is perhaps a little too dramatic, but I think can be confirmed by some other people who were there. I went before the executive board, about 10, and there were some noteworthy Nisei there, including George Aratani, Peter Okada here, Mel Chujioji and others. And here they were wrestling with this problem. And I said, well, we've got to get off the dime. The Japanese banking crisis was then about 4 years old, and I said, they're never going to get rid of this problem. There's too much face, there's too much, all these classic Japanese issues. But then I leaned forward and I said, I've got a way for you to solve this problem. And they said, "You do?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, let's hear it." I said, "Let's take a vote." And they said, "Oh my God, we can't do that. I mean, everybody's going to have to publicly declare. And we're going to be criticized for not being able to work this out." So they said, "We'll do it." In the afternoon, they took a vote. They said, "Okay, do you have a motion, Gret?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to move." At that point, they had, among Japanese Americans, they had only Danny and Norm. All right, that's sort of odd in the first instance. So I said, well, I move that the following people be added: Mike Masoka, Minya Sui, Sparky Matsunaga, and Bob Matsui. All right, and then I got a little emotional, and I said, well, in 1942, the Sansei say And some white radicals say, "You all went like sheep. What was wrong with you?" I said, "Yeah, but men didn't." And so on and so forth. And I said, "You can't have Norm up there without Bob, and you can't have Danny up there without Sparky. You can't do that. And you gotta have Mike. This is Mike's idea. Mike was the one who, produced Issei citizenship, among many other things." So they went around the room, and we won 25-6. And people were still very upset. So over a course of 5 or 6 of these meetings, each time we brought this issue up in a slightly different way, and each time we won by similar margins. And so there was still a great hue and cry. Mike Masogo betrayed us, da-da-da-da-da. But, what can you do in a democratic society absent force? The duly constituted body has voted 25-6 on any number of occasions to include the name. And so he was included. And I think, at any given point in history, people fight for, as Marx himself said, you fight for control and interpretation of the past because that controls how one moves forward into the future. So if you define history carved literally in stone with Mike's name, that produces a certain conception of our history.